You know, when you pick up a history book, it's usually filled with stories of kings, queens, and sprawling empires. But what if that's only part of the picture? Today, we're diving into the other history of the Indian subcontinent, a story that belongs to tribes, to nomads, to entire societies that lived by a completely different set of rules. This is a history that didn't happen in palaces, but in forests, on mountains, and out on the open road.
Go on, picture it. You're probably thinking of massive forts, right? Or maybe lavish royal courts, the whole rise and fall of great dynasties. And yeah, that's totally fair. That's the story we're all told. But it is not the complete story. At the exact same time all of that was going on, millions of people were living completely different kinds of lives in societies that looked nothing like a kingdom.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at what society was like beyond the throne. Then we'll explore the incredible mosaic of tribes that covered the land and get into the amazing lives of nomads who were always on the move. After that, we'll see what happened when these worlds inevitably collided and how some tribes didn't just hang on, they built massive kingdoms of their own. It all comes together to tell a much richer, more complete story.
All right, let's start right there. A history beyond the throne. While these huge kingdoms were busy expanding and, making all the headlines, there were these other societies operating on totally different principles, often thriving right on the edges of those same empires.
And the difference between them was, well, it was like night and day. On one side, you've got the kingdom, which is all about a strict social hierarchy called Varna. This system created a huge gap between the rich and the poor. But then you have tribal societies, where kinship, those family bonds, was literally the glue holding everything together. They had their own customs, their own rules, and they shared resources among the entire clan.
Let's just pause on that term for a second. Varna. This was the formal, top-down social structure, the ladder that was endorsed by the powerful and used by kings to organize their world. It decided everything. Now, the key thing to understand is that tribal societies existed almost completely outside this system. It's not that they were on the bottom rung of the ladder. They weren't even on the same ladder.
So if these tribes weren't part of the whole kingdom system, who were they? Well, we're not just talking about a few small, isolated groups here. We are talking about a vast, vibrant mosaic of different peoples that stretched across the entire subcontinent. And this map really gives you a sense of the sheer scale. Up in the Punjab region, you had powerful tribes like the Ghakkars. Way out in the northwest, the Balochis were a huge force. Then you've got a massive part of western and central India that was home to the Bhils. And all the way in the northeast, you find the Nagas, the Ahoms, and so many more. I mean, they were everywhere.
So what really defined these incredibly diverse groups? Well, for one, they often lived in places that were pretty tough to get to. Deep forests, rugged mountains, sprawling deserts. They got everything they needed straight from the land, whether that meant farming, hunting, or herding animals. And this is fascinating. They generally didn't keep written records. Their entire history, their laws, their stories, it was all preserved in a really rich oral tradition, passed down from generation to generation.
And the absolute foundational block of their society was the clan. You can think of it as this big, extended family of families where everyone believes they came from the same original ancestor. And this wasn't just some nice idea. This deep sense of shared identity was the organizing principle for their entire world. Okay, so beyond these settled tribes, there was another massive group of people living outside the mainstream, the nomads. And for them, life was all about being constantly on the move. And their lifestyles could look very different. Some, like a lot of the Bhil clans, were hunter-gatherers, following the seasons and the herds of animals. Others were what we call pastoralists, moving with their livestock. And then you had these incredibly important long-distance traders, who were like the economic arteries connecting the whole subcontinent. And when we talk about trader nomads, there's one group that was absolutely crucial, the Banjaras. Seriously, the best way to think of them is as the long-haul truckers of medieval India. Their giant caravans, called tandas, were a constant, vital presence on pretty much every major trade route. And the scale of what they did, it's just staggering. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir even wrote about them, talking about how they moved grain for the entire imperial army. Try to picture this. A single military campaign could need a caravan of 100,000 bullocks just to carry grain, an entire mobile supply chain run by the Banjaras. We actually have this incredible eyewitness account from a 17th century English trader, Peter Mundy. He saw one of these caravans and couldn't believe his eyes. He counted 14,000 oxen in one tanda.
And he perfectly described their business model. They would buy grain where it was cheap and haul it to places where it was more expensive. These people were the engine of the mobile economy.
So you've got these two very different worlds, the settled, caste-based kingdoms and the mobile, kinship-based tribes. You have to ask, what happened when they met? Because, they didn't just exist in separate bubbles. They were constantly interacting, trading with each other, depending on each other, and sometimes clashing with each other. And one of the biggest consequences of all this interaction was social change. See, as the big kingdom economies grew, they needed people with new skills, specialist artisans like blacksmiths, carpenters, masons. A lot of these specialists came from tribal groups. Over time, many of them were absorbed into the caste system, but not as individuals. They were brought in as whole groups and given the status of new, smaller castes called jatis.
And this is the crucial point to remember. This was absolutely a two-way street. The relationship was complex, sometimes it was conflict, sometimes it was codependence. But this constant contact meant that both worlds, the settled kingdoms and the tribal societies, were slowly but surely changing because of each other.
But getting absorbed into the caste system wasn't the only way things went. And here's where the story takes a really fascinating turn. Some tribes took a completely different path. Instead of joining the existing system, they leveled up and built powerful, organized states of their own.
Let's look at two incredible examples. In central India, you have the Gons. They transformed their society from just a collection of clans into a massive, centralized kingdom called Garha. Mughal records say it had 70,000 villages. Meanwhile, way over in the northeast, the Ahoms built a really formidable state, and they did it using advanced military tech. Get this, they were using gunpowder and making high-quality cannons way back in the 1530s.
And what's so fascinating is that even as these new tribal states grew and adopted things from mainstream culture, like the Ahom kings adopting Hinduism, they didn't just throw away their own traditions. They skillfully held onto their unique beliefs, creating this amazing hybrid culture that was both new and old at the same time. The story of the Gons also gives us these incredible heroic figures, like Rani Durgavati. When the massive Mughal army came to attack her kingdom, she didn't just step aside, she led the resistance from the front. And when it was clear they were going to lose, she chose to die on her own terms rather than surrender. It's just such a powerful story about the fierce independence of these states. So, after all that, what is the real story here? What's the big takeaway when we look at this other side of history?
It's this: the history of the subcontinent was not just one single story written by empires. It was a dynamic, ongoing conversation between two very different kinds of societies. This constant interaction forced both sides to adapt and evolve. Sure, some tribes were pulled into the caste system, but many others pushed back, rejected it, and built powerful kingdoms that challenged the old empires on their own terms.
In the end, what this all shows us is that history is never as simple as we think. Just knowing that these complex, powerful, and diverse societies existed right alongside the famous empires forces us to rethink the entire story of the past. And that leaves us with one final, big question to think about. How does knowing about these other histories change the way we understand the social world of the subcontinent today?